All right, awesome. We are meeting tonight with Adrienne Outlaw, who is a brilliant, somewhat difficult. That's not the right word I want, but you have an interaction. You know how you work with your art and what you do with it. I find really intriguing. But let's go back to the beginning. Where were you born? Where were you raised? Did you always know you were an artist? All of those.
Okay, I was born in Orlando, Florida, raised in Florida and all over the Southeast, and I always knew I wanted to be an artist or a writer, and it turns out I'm both. I knew for sure probably by junior year in high school, but I remember very much thinking that I wanted to do it in third grade.
Yep. And how has your work changed since third grade?
It hasn't at all.
No, see, I knew that.
So I guess I used to doodle a lot. In high school, I was not known as an artist because growing up in the Southeast, I didn't draw hands or Corvettes. So the only thing I really had to hang on to was fashion. So I went to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago thinking I was going to go into the fashion department. But once I hit the fiber department, everything came together and made sense for me. Oh, so changing, so now, gosh, I mean, what do I not do? I use all materials sort of available, and I use them based on sort of what they bring to the table conceptually. So I might use fingernails or hair if I'm trying to reference body materials and genetic manipulation. You know, I might use metal if I'm trying to talk about, you know, a hard versus soft juxtaposition, that kind of thing. Now I'm doing a lot of video work and installation and performance.
How do you, I mean, I don't know, I don't want to jump into this as quickly, but here we are. How does your art sustain you monetarily and emotionally and the rest? But let's deal with the monetary.
Sure. So I sell some work, not a lot, but I sell some. I get honoraries for lectures. I make money through writing and curating, and I make money through Seed Space. So it's basically a cobbling together of all those different ways of making money.
What is Seed Space?
So I run a lab, and I've been running a lab for the past 5 years from my studio called Seed Space, and we call it a lab for artists, writers, and curators. And I'll back up and talk about that a little bit, and cut me off if I'm going off on a tangent. But see, back in 2006, I had a museum show that was connected to a university, and I wanted to do a catalog. So I asked them if I could write a grant to support the catalog. And I said, you know, if I write it and do the narrative, you know, do you mind submitting it? And they said, sure, it was a great idea. And so I kind of understood how to start writing grants through that process. And then I realized from that as an independent artist, you can go under either have a nonprofit be a fiscal agent for yourself, or which is what the museum did. So from there, I started working with an institution here in Nashville called Nashville Cultural Arts Project. And so I started just, you know, any kind of idea that I got in terms of grants or a show that I wanted to put together, I asked that entity at the time if I could write a grant under them, and they said fine. And then eventually I started Seed Space and sort of took that organization over.
What is a fiscal agent? I know the answer, but...
A fiscal agent tends to be an arts institution. It doesn't have to be an arts institution, but it tends to be an arts institution that will submit the grant on an artist's behalf to the granting organization, and then they receive the money from the granting organization and dole it out to the artist. And sometimes they take a cut and sometimes they don't.
I tend to talk about laundering when I talk about fiscal agents, which probably isn't the most polite thing. But, you know, if you artists in the course were to go to a collector and say, could you please give me $5,000 to facilitate this project? And they go, well, sure, I'd love to, but I'd really like a write-off. Can you get me a write-off? And then you could go to a fiscal agent like the New York Foundation for the Arts has. I think they've spun off one, and it's called either Spire or Pinnacle or something that sounds like that. And I think, Fractured Atlas does it also, and they take, I think, 7% or about that for the for laundering fee is probably not the right term. For processing those funds so that they can give it legitimately to an artist, and the person that you're asking for the money they write the check to the New York Foundation for the Arts or Spire or Fractured Atlas, and then they give, with your name in the for part of the check, right? Not the to part. And then you end up with the money or the bulk of it. So how much of your funding, can you break this down into percentages approximately? And it doesn't have to be accurate, it could be romantic. But, like in the last 12 months or the last 5 years, how much of your money comes from what kinds of sources? I mean, I want to show that there are other ways for an artist to sustain themselves besides I sell this piece, I buy a loaf of bread.
Yeah, absolutely. Off the top of my head, I'm going to say probably a quarter from sales, a quarter, maybe a fifth from sales, a quarter from seed space, a quarter from curatorial fees, and then a quarter for, just various honorariums when I give talks, or, sometimes when you give a show, they give you an honorarium.
What's your track record with grants? I mean, like every time you get a grant, apply for a grant, you get it?
I'm pretty good. But I am pretty good about writing grants, but I will also say that I've just this year started writing them more competitively.
As opposed to what?
And actually, I should back up a little bit. I don't often write grants for myself, for my own work. So what I do through Seed Space is write grants to fund Seed Space. I haven't found as many grants for individual artists, but I'm just now starting to find them. For example, there's Harpo Foundation. Their deadline's coming up soon. There's the Franklin Furnace Works. There's Creative Capital. Those are three off the top of my head that I'll be applying to this year.
How much, all right, so you're drawing from 4 different sources. How many directions, how many different art hats do you wear, and how much time is spent in those directions?
I have my fingers in too many pots, probably, and there's nothing that I don't do, really. So for a long time, I supported myself by reporting on the arts for the Nashville Public Radio affiliate, the National Public Radio affiliate, which is Nashville Public Radio, and I wrote art columns for the newspaper. In terms of art hats, I write about it, I curate, I give talks, make work, I run the space, I support other artists. I don't know, what's not in there?
Mom. You're a mom to two kids.
Right. Well, that doesn't give me art money. But yes, I'm a mom.
No, but it gives you art angst.
Actually, it helps me a lot with art angst.
So, that's good. Does it serve you and your reputation to be doing all these things simultaneously, or does it hinder? Or
that's a $4,000 question, and I'm not really sure. I think in my greater capacity in running Seed Space, I have a lot of name recognition. I know that people are inviting me to do these talks in part because I do run Seed Space. I don't think it probably helps me get individual shows, and it probably hinders me in that regard.
Do you wish you were doing more of your own art, per se, more of the time?
It depends on how busy Seed Space is. I mean, I certainly think of, so I consider myself what's called a socially engaged artist, where I'm almost always working with the community to make works, and I don't mean that in terms of what I consider not terribly good community-driven art, but more art in which I invite the public into my studio, or I go out to them and make something where I'm the sort of the artistic director. I don't know where I was going with that. Was that the help and hindrance question?
Sure. That might be the one after that, but go ahead.
I went off on a tangent about that. Oh, right. So Seed Space, I consider a work of social sculpture, where what I'm really trying to do with Seed Space is dissolve the hierarchies. So we're always pairing an emerging artist up with a more established artist. We're pairing an emerging artist with a more established curator or critic. So what we do with Seed Space is we bring in artists to do both solo and group shows, and then we also we have put the bulk of our money into bringing nationally recognized critics and curators to write about those shows, with the idea that what the artists most want and need is validation. So we produce an exhibition brochure. So in terms of, do I feel like I'm doing enough of my own work, it kind of depends on how busy I am with Seed Space. I will certainly say for the past 6 months, I've really not felt that I've done enough of my own work, and it's been really bothering me. But then I, actually applied for and got a residency, and, I sat down and took some time for myself and applied for some things and got them. So now I see a lot of opportunities to just sit and make work, and that makes me really happy.
What happens to Seed Space when you go off on a residency?
So Seed Space is not just me. It was for a while. Well, I shouldn't say it's ever been just me. Seed Space is definitely about building community. So I have a curator who works with me, so she's in charge of selecting all the artists and organizing all the shows. And let's see, maybe about 4 months ago, we brought on a programs manager. So we run exhibitions, which breaks up into art and technology exhibits, what we call Seed Social Residencies, where artists want to come and work directly with the community. We have our 2D and video works. So that's our exhibitions. We have a program called Community Supported Art, where we commission nationally exhibited, Nashville-based artists to make limited editions for us that we then sell to the public to establish an artist collector base and to support the artist. We've just recently, a year ago, started a pretty intensive professional development workshop series where we bring in critics, curators, artists, gallery dealers to talk about the business, basically what you do, Paul. We run what I call a participatory forum, where we bring in someone, like we just had Michelle Grabner, and instead of asking those people to come prepared with visuals and talk at the audience, it's more of a Q&A style discussion. So I will introduce the person, and I'll sort of introduce them and ask a leading question, and then I kind of just keep prodding the audience to ask the speaker questions, because the idea is we're trying to bring these people in to get to know us and to learn from us as much as we're learning for them. So that's the speaker series, and I think I covered it all.
And Nashville also has a pretty supportive arts council, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. So we existed primarily with grants from the Metro Nashville Arts Commission and the Tennessee Arts Commission for the first 3 or 4 years. And then since then, like just last year, we got a big grant from the Elizabeth Firestone Graham Foundation to put together a catalog. And we finally last year hired Ginger Schulich-Porcella of Big Deal Arts to create a financial calendar for us and come up with a list of grants for us to apply for and have her guide us through the process.
Let's talk about you and your work. What does it mean to be a socially engaged artist? Is every artist socially engaged, or is nobody else? Or, what do you mean?
Sure. I think the biggest, way to differentiate is you've got this, or some people have this romantic idea of the painter or the sole painter or sculptor going into his or her studio to make work by themselves. They could care less, what anybody is thinking about it. They make it in their studio, then most of them want to send it to a gallery museum and to sell it. So that's primarily enjoying the art for art's sake and selling it to support them. Socially engaged artists are more, they tend to be political activists. The critique of them is they're often sort of more social workers. A lot of socially engaged work is sort of considered like a soup kitchen or a protest song or something like that. And I do something in between there, in which I come up with a concept. For example, one of my pieces a few years ago was a piece called Shelter, in which it's twin steel. Sorry, this is where I start talking about my own work and I fumble. It's two steel cages that resemble a Gothic arch entrance and a rib cage, and one is completely covered with a nylon fabric and completely pierced with 1.2 million small silver nails, and the other rib cage is left empty. So in order to make the piece, I invited 300 people into my studio over the course of the year, and we talked about what the idea of shelter is. So at each we call them piercing parties, we would ask people to pierce in what their idea of shelter is. So I always sort of ask this leading question to get people to start thinking. And then also during the course of making this, we would have sort of piercing, what did we call them? Pierce-a-thons or something. And so we raised money for like the domestic violence shelter and the YWCA. But for me, that resulting piece of socially engaged art actually then went out to a museum and then a gallery. So that's the kind of social practice I do outside of Seed Space.
But they're what? Sympathetic.
Who? What?
Everything you do, and you're specifically your individual work and Seed Space.
Do you mean did they work together?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's not like on one hand you are a NASCAR driver and on the other hand you make paintings.
Right. Yes. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. I want to talk about your name for a second. This isn't the name you were born with?
It is. My married legal name is Adrienne Outlaw Piston, so it gets even more fun. So I have a lot of aliases, but my born name is Adrienne Outlaw.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, who was the person whose name popped up when you phoned me?
I don't know. It's probably my husband's name, David Piston.
No, Catherine Bell. What's that?
I have no idea.
Oh, you must have her phone. Okay.
Okay. That's very odd.
So you were born Adrienne. So how does one get the name Outlaw?
It's funny you ask because I just looked up our heritage. A lot of outlaws came from England, and there's a lot of outlaws in North Carolina, Alabama, and Tennessee, and that's as far as I know. Other than that, I don't really know. I always sort of figured my great-grandfather married a Creek Indian, and maybe the name Outlaw came from there, but that's just me fantasizing.
But it's such a totally fabulous name.
I do love it. I do love it.
That's amazing. All right, I thought you chose it, and I thought it was particularly appropriate for socially engaged work, and therefore, I had this whole other train of thought going. So
it is fun when I send out my, sort of email newsletters, how I can title them. Like one was when I had some work at one of the satellite fairs at Basel. I got to say Outlaw Miami. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely. But your name is like more memorable than anybody's, and I think that.
No. There's actually a gay outlaw in San Francisco, and I think that's really a lot of fun.
Yes. But it's really I mean, you come with it. Nobody forgets your name, do they?
They don't tend to. I hadn't thought about that. They don't tend to.
I mean, I know a wonderful artist whose name is Chris Smith, and I think he's sort of it's a problem, and so he uses his middle initial, but
yeah.
You don't have that problem.
No, I'm pretty blessed with my name.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay, so but do you think that Do you think that your name determines your aesthetic at all?
You know, people actually ask that a lot because of the name. People actually ask that a lot because of the name.
Yeah, that was fascinating. I don't know. Yeah, that's fascinating. I don't know what that. There you go. Yeah, we did hear that, and that's because somebody joined us and they were unmuted and they had feedback and we picked up on it.
Okay. Yeah, people ask me about my art, and I just tell them I'm a good outlaw.
Well, yeah, definitely. All right, so let's talk more about the socially engaged, art. How do you have to preconceive a project pretty specifically? It's not so much like making a painting where it's a dialogue between you and the canvas, where you make a mark and then you respond to it, and then you let it sit and ponder it.
I just never do that. My art is very, very labor intensive and very thoughtful and very, I don't mean other people's isn't thoughtful, but I think I'm a very slow thinker, so I have to think through a lot of the concepts and what I'm trying to get across and how that will be perceived by the general public. So I do a lot of that before I actually make the work. So I kind of try to troubleshoot everything that I'm doing, especially when I'm making the work by including the public.
This is I think, very much akin to doing commissions, where you have a concept and then you become a project manager.
Yeah, I often think of myself as more of an impresario, particularly when I'm doing a big piece, because I'm kind of directing a bunch of different aspects of the project. The good thing about working that way is, when you have to think out pretty much everything in advance and you have to make pretty detailed proposal images, you use that to get the funding for the project. So I kind of do almost self-commission. For example, I'm doing a sculpture for Dyer Observatory here in Nashville, and I proposed that I would work with a couple astrophysicists to make this work and to make a series of lighted sculptures that would be shown around the university and then be housed at Dyer. For another project, a lot of my work right now has to do with the health crisis and the obesity crisis, particularly in the South. So for another project of that, which is a performance piece, which is called Play, I'm commissioning, or I shouldn't say commissioning, hiring for people to wear costumes made out of small plastic balls, and then they're going to be running around an audience and asking them to play with them, and then once they're done playing, sort of like a 10-second interaction with somebody, then they'll say, thanks, I'm trying to lose these, and they'll hand actually a piece of the costume to that participant. So it's almost like a game of telephone tag, a live telephone tag, to see if the audience members will start enjoying the joy of movement. So, for example, for a piece like that, I write much better than I speak. I put that together in a proposal, and I say, hey, I need $4,000 to do this project, and I'll do it for your organization. And, they take it or not. But somebody actually
What do you mean when you say I'll do it for your organization? What does that mean?
So if it's an organization that's already got a call, for example, there's a place in Atlanta called Flux Project. So they actually will commission artists to do this type of performance. So you would write it to to the Flux projects and say, this is how much this project budget is, and I will do this during the night of Flux happenings in Atlanta. Or there was a center here called the Curb Center for Art, Enterprise, and Public Policy, and they had a similar call. So I said, I will do this during a sporting event on your campus. Because to me, it often doesn't really matter who the audience is, as long as I know who the audience is or get a good idea of who the audience is, so that I make sure to gear the art for that audience. For example, Play could be adapted to a sporting event or toward a graduation ceremony or toward like a Bonnaroo Music Fest.
So it isn't necessarily, most often it isn't for an art audience. That is what we...
And I'm increasingly not doing work for, I'm increasingly doing work for non-art audiences. I'm really, and I've always been very interested in trying to get the general public trying to educate the general public and get them more understanding of and appreciative of the way artists can engage with the public and partner with the public to do good things.
This is interesting. So I'm assuming that they appreciate the project frequently, not always. And then I'm wondering how that parlays or what goes beyond that. Do you get a sense that they now will visit a museum more often than they did in the previous 5 years?
I don't have a good way to, survey people who I haven't interacted with. For example, one of my projects, I made 500 brain-shaped viewfinders that I distributed worldwide, and people were just supposed to find them and pick them up. And then they could go visit this blog that I made. So, for instance, with that project, I don't really have a way to track people except if they visit the blog. Now, I do have a way to track people when they actually participate with me on these projects, and that has been sort of an enormous bang for the buck in that they really seem to have a much greater appreciation of the rigor of art making. And I'll give you an example. For a piece called Vessels, it was reminiscent of like prayer walls throughout the world. So what we made were these little brass boxes using strips of brass mesh that I had cut into strips and pre-pierced, and during the workshops, we had the participants sew the brass strips together by hand using clear monofilament. And if they didn't do it correctly, I would, very nicely go over and take out their stitches and make them stitch it correctly. So I was really trying to teach the participants that when you see a very simple or elegant artwork, that there's a lot of labor, there's a lot of thought that goes into that piece. And then from the social practice standpoint, at each workshop, I would ask the participants to think about somebody that they helped or somebody that helped them. And that was pretty neat because people started just like pouring out these stories to each other about those topics. That really sort of took me by surprise because they were sharing so much with each other. So anyway, from those kinds of experiences, people will really often, send me emails and talk about what they got from that particular piece or what they've gone on to think about or learn.
So that felt successful.
Yeah. It was neat. It was installed in the hospital. Tragically, one of the staff members of the hospital died soon after, and the other part of the piece where there's little slips that you are invited to write down your thoughts, your prayers on, and then they get inserted into the wall. And it just happened to be that somebody passed away that a lot of people knew, so they then had a place to go and mourn.
That's really neat. I was working on a piece that I was trying to bring to Chicago with, I'm blanking on her name, Francis Ford Coppola's wife, who sponsored a piece that was really, who was involved in a piece that's really similar to this. She might be somebody you want to reach out to. She's pretty interesting. What's that?
I said I'll check her out. Thank you.
Cool. Ellie, I think. It's Ellie. It's short for Eleonora. How do you determine what is successful? I mean, is it a gut feeling that what you projected was surpassed itself, or what?
Sure. There's like many different levels of success for me. There's financial success. Did the project get funded, or did the project get purchased in the end? There's critical success of, did a critic write about it, and did the critic understand what I was trying to do, and of course, what publication did it land in? So that's the arty art part. the other, just sort of aesthetic success is typically when I stand back and I squeal or stomp or something and I say, I really care less if anybody else likes this piece. It's awesome. And then there's also the participant level of success of if I'm involving participants, what did they get out of it? Did it impact them at all? For instance, I just finished a commission for an airport in which I did a video piece about the idea of sharing. And so I worked with an elementary school where I had them all knead bread and pass bread. So all I was doing was videoing them passing bread, and I really was having a hard time understanding if anyone was actually getting anything out of it, because I was directing these little kids pretty specifically. But several of their parents emailed me later and told me that their kid really loved that workshop and wanted to do something else, like it again, and where could they do kind of an art thing again. So that meant a lot to me. And then the other part of that video, I went and worked with a center that serves largely an immigrant population. And so I had the clients and the staff from that center do the same exercise, and they just really liked it. I've really noticed that people not in the art world are very attracted to and appreciative of working with artists, and particularly when they find out that we're not crazy, that we're not selfish or egotistical, they just seem to like it a lot.
That's good.
We that hang out with just other people in the art world, we just don't realize how attractive we are to the non-art world, I think.
No, we need to repeat that. We're sexy.
I know. Artists are the only ones that can be complete geeks and get away with being cool at the same time, I think.
True. No, that's really good. Which comes first in these situations? Do you think of a project and then look for someone to do it on? Or do you find the venue, the recipient, and then look for a project that fulfills, honors, enhances what they're about?
It totally depends. Sometimes I come across something and I'm just so inspired, and I will propose something to that place because they've just kind of blown me away with something. And then other times I'll see a call for art and I'll say, how can I adapt what I'm thinking to sort of serve my needs and serve this organization's needs? I think one of the things that I do really well with my proposals, and I encourage all artists or all business people to do it, is propose a win-win situation. I think a lot of times artists say, I want to do this, and you should give me some money because I'm an artist. And that's just not a good enough answer. I believe, like in any proposal, if you're going to come to somebody to show your work or sell your work or get them to fund your work, you should say, this is what I want to do, and this is how it's going to help your organization.
Now, the win-win thing is really important. That's a really good idea. I need to be reminded. That sounds like me, but I still need to be reminded of it.
I think we all do. It's easy to say, but it's hard to always think that way. But I do want to finish answering that question because I also make work for galleries and museums, and that kind of work tends to be mostly more studio-driven by myself. And for that work, I'm a little freer to make whatever I'm making, as long as it's staying within the concept. I'm working on a show right now for a show in Atlanta this summer, and it's called Sweet Demise. And again, it's still within the healthcare crisis, but this is more object-driven, so these objects will hopefully sell in the gallery show.
How much does a project change from conception to fulfillment?
Not a whole lot.
From the grant, so there's not a lot of latitude. So you need to be really organized and really clear of your vision at the conception.
Yeah.
And then that would be really hard for me.
I think it'd probably be hard for a lot of artists. I haven't thought about it that way. I think for me, one of my best friends is a conservator. She actually works at the Field Museum now, and so thinking about issues of, you know, do I want this piece to be ephemeral or do I want this piece to be archival? How many hours did I put into this piece? How many years do I want it to last? Having to tackle those types of, you know, structural integrity issues within the artwork, you know, how's it going to break down for shipping, et cetera, makes me really have to step back and do a lot of engineering and a lot of materials research because I'm always dealing with really weird materials. You know, like right now my work's made out of sugar, so that makes a lot of people very scared. So I test it out for a few years before I try to show it or do something, you know, that I will sell and try to guarantee a lifespan for.
How many? So that with your own, but that's for your own practice, right? As opposed to a grant-funded piece.
Right.
And so the personal work is pretty much as pre-planned.
That would be less planned out.
But still a bunch.
Yeah. I mean, you know, like with the sugar stuff, I knew what I wanted to do for performances, but in terms of really making something that was aesthetically beautiful, yet grotesque enough to, you know, both attract and repel the audience, I had to really be in the studio a lot to think about what symbolism I'm going to use and how I'm going to present that and what materials I'm going to put it on. But to do that, I'm not as good in terms of pre-thinking all of that out. So, you know, I started out doing these sugar sculptures, and then I tried putting, sort of doing these sugar paintings to make these white-on-white pieces, and then I went to painting the sugar on glass, and so I'm still kind of working out all those issues of exactly how I'm going to present the work.
I find this fascinating. What's the lead time? Let's go with the public stuff. I mean, like, with this piece, I don't know, pick one, but I want to know, or pick a typical one. You know, how much time is there between the conception and applying for the grant? How much time is there between the grant and when the piece begins to be created?
Sure. So, you know, where a lot of artists will stay focused on one particular project and make a huge leap with that one particular project. I think often of myself as sort of the turtle in the race, where I'm doing, like, can you see my fingers, like these little tiny babies the whole way, but I'm doing that with like 10 different projects. So probably nothing takes less than 2 years, but I'm you know, probably producing at least 5 different major things all throughout that time. So Shelter, to take one huge example, took a full 6 years in the making in terms of coming up with the concept and really finding the right material to use. I did a huge amount of materials research, figuring out how that appropriate material would work with the concept, figuring out how am I going to get 300 people, you know, I mean, we spent 10,000 hours piercing that thing, how we're going to pierce this thing. Vessels probably only took maybe a year from start to finish, maybe 2 years. The Sweet Demise series, the sugar work, has been two years in the making.
So how many things? So you're working on at least 3 things simultaneously in different stages of development.
Pretty much. So, you know, in terms of hardcore, how am I going to pull all this off? The month of March, I'm planning to finish those sculptures because, you know, again, I've got the whole thing mapped out in my head. Now I just need to go basically do it. Finish those sculptures for the Dyer Observatory, and then April, I will create the costumes and train the performers for the play piece. And then in May, primarily during the artist residency at Hambidge, I'll be finishing the Sweet Demise series that I will then exhibit in June. And then in August, I'm doing another commission it's a commission because I wrote the proposal and I said this would be great for you. And then in September through the end of this year, I'm also working on a video during all of that for a show that I organized a social practice show about the healthcare crisis that I organized for the Parthenon Museum in Centennial Park here in Nashville. So
couldn't you do it easier, like be in charge of NASA? I mean, do you know what you're going to be doing December 7th?
Pretty much. Although I will say, after January of next year, I don't think that I have anything going on. But sometimes I forget. Now, if I don't have a calendar, I triple book myself all the time. It's bad.
You must be amazingly organized. You seem very much in the flow and present and in the moment, but you've got to be looking very far forward.
I do. I probably most like to work out everything about 3 years in advance. Like the show at the Parthenon that's coming up, I've probably been working on that for 3 or 4 years.
Let's open up for
something. It's really sort of me talking with other people and talking out the idea and saying, you know, hanging out with friends or colleagues and saying, this is what I'm thinking. Will you poke some holes in it?
And poke some holes in it. That's a good one. Do you have a team that you work with on a recurring basis? Do you have a studio and a studio manager? Do you have someone who does things for you, or is it all you? No?
We left all of them out. It's always rotating. I have a really strong internship program, which I learned from my student days at the Art Institute. So on my website, people who get credit, they work hours a week for about 3 months. A lot of my interns stay for a year or two, and I kind of determine when it's time to push them out of the studio, or I will hire them. So I have basically a combination of interns, volunteers, and paid people working with me all the time. And I get volunteers, I think, in part because I do so much work with the public. You know, a lot of people who call me up and want to work with me are not artists, and I don't care that they are. What I want to do is sort of share the experience and give them insight and give them something fun to do and hang out with them, and, you know, and basically in return for brute labor.
Do you know anybody like you? I don't know if I do.
Yeah.
There must. I mean, like, I don't know, Oliver Eliasson comes to mind.
I mean, I don't know. You know, you look at so many other people, and like the things that I do just pale in comparison. So I'm just constantly amazed with what artists are able to, you know, pull off. I think one of the things that's allowed me to do as much as that I've done is I've really concentrated my efforts locally for the past few years. So probably starting next year, I'll start to branch out and try to do these performances and more ephemeral works that I'm doing here in Nashville, kind of using it as my testing ground, because I've got so many resources. If something goes wrong, you know, I can run and fix something, and then start trying to do that in other cities.
If you guys have questions, raise your hands. You picked Nashville. Nashville wasn't home before you went there, was it?
I grew up in Nashville from third grade to the end of high school. I left like as fast as I could possibly get out of here, and I thought I would never come back, and I came back kicking and screaming, but now I mean, this city is hot. I really love this city. And the thing that I really like about Nashville, you know, in Chicago, you could help influence the way things were done there, but you were a lot of the infrastructure had already been set up, so you weren't really able to, at least in the time that I was there, be a bigger player or do bigger projects. And when you go to a smaller city, I think you're really able to help drive the creative capital of that city. So for me personally, it's been a lot of fun because I get to participate in the creative fabric of the city in a pretty major way, where I don't know if I'd be able to do that in the same way in a bigger city.
I feel like Nashville is big enough. I feel Nashville's big enough. How big is it?
It's 1.5 million people.
Okay.
It's getting a huge amount of, I guess, cultural press recently with, maybe we're still trying to figure out why, but I guess the show Nashville and, I don't know. We have a lot of people who are moving here from Chicago and New York mostly, because it's still an affordable city. We've got a really great artist community. Pretty much like anything you want to do here, you just do it. Which is great.
That's wonderful. Yeah. Monica, you have a question. Hi, Monica. Did you have your surgery, Monica?
Not till April 10th.
Oh, okay. All right.
I'm still mentally preparing. Hi, Adrienne. Do you remember me?
Of course I remember you. So I put Monica in a big show. And I've never
wonderful show.
We've talked on the phone a few times.
We've talked on the phone, but I don't think I've ever seen your face except in photographs, so it's great. Yeah, in fact, one of the reasons I signed up was I saw your name, and I was like, I have to talk to Adrienne.
Wonderful.
Have it with me. That's funny because I'm actually going to send the catalog to a well-connected person pretty soon.
Oh, that's delightful. Actually, that was part of my question was, that it seemed like that was one of your earlier projects that was almost more straightforward in that it was curatorial, or were you doing that and all these other more, participatory projects at the same time?
I'm trying to think of the time span. Our first show was in 2009, right? 2009 to 2012. Yeah. So Monica was in a show called Take Care, Bioethics of Motherhood in the 21st Century. So I was really interested in, me personally, a lot of my work has been interested in ethical issues about how fast we're progressing technologically, and we haven't caught up with that emotionally or intellectually. So, and this happens a lot where, I could be making this work by myself in the studio, and I could go off and have a show, and a group show or a solo show or, what have you. But what I really wanted to do was find like-minded artists who are making work along similar issues. So I said, this would be super cool. Why don't I put a show together and see if I can get a catalog and travel it? So I spent a lot of time researching for artists who I just thought the artistic caliber was great. And so I contacted all of them, and I said, hey, do you want to be in a show? And I kind of had an organization who was looking at doing it, and sadly that fell through. But we ended up traveling it over 4 years to 7 different venues, I think 2 museums. We went to Miami, and we put together a big catalog. So your question.
I remember there was a lot of trouble just getting the show moving. We had to take the word motherhood out of it.
Oh, okay,
yeah.
So you were asking me about the other things. The trouble with that was, so I had proposed that show, and I'd proposed another show kind of at the same time, and the other show got a bucket of funding. Again, and I've actually heard back from some of the curators who were kind of still in touch. They were the show was too controversial for a lot of places to take. Take Care ended up getting some of my backseat time. The other show ended up getting so much funding. So it's and back to Paul's question too, in terms of who was this village sort of working with you, I really realized from the Take Care show where I could have done it by myself, probably not well. Every artist in the show kind of ended up putting some effort into it in terms of helping to find venues or I don't even remember everything else, but we ended up kind of making curatorial decisions as a group, didn't we? It was really neat.
Yeah, well, I was far away. I think there were people who were closer who were maybe more engaged with the specific work, but I remember lots of conversations about the title that we went around a bunch of times. So the things that, for me, it was primarily through email and was the verbal stuff in a way. But then, and then definitely you had some of the artists actually went with you and you took it to a couple places. Yeah, to Miami. and also to the prize, the art prize. Was that Miami? Was that the art prize?
You know, Cher got it an art prize, and I think that was
Cher flick.
I think, and then Miami was the second.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, and even doing it in Miami, you know, I divided up the time. I was really so she said we took the Take Care show to one of the satellite fairs in Miami, and you know, one of my big concerns was I you know, just being self-aware. I knew I couldn't sort of sit the booth for 12 hours at a time and entertain people. So I think five artists in the show came down. One of the artists got us a luxury condo to stay in for free. You know, everybody kind of pitched in with like whatever they could bring to the table for it. And then we all ended up sitting the booth sort of in teams of 2 for 2 or 3 hours at a time so that the other of us could go out and see the other fairs in Miami and, you know, generally have fun. So that was, gosh, I wish you had been there. It was an amazing experience.
Yeah. There were many times I wish I had been able to follow this show because you know, the images from the shows were so beautiful. I don't think I was able to go to one opening, but I just, you know, I just followed it.
Yeah.
It was great. It was worth it.
I think to resurrect that show.
Yeah. Well, at some point, I hope it has a future life. It was a great show. But, you know, I also had just a more practical question about, you said that Seed Space sort of took over the Nashville, what did you say? I'm trying to look back at my notes. You said that you worked with to create Seed Space, you worked with the Nashville, was it the Nashville Arts Commission?
Oh, Nashville Arts Project, which was the nonprofit that existed at the time.
So that existed, and now that's no longer exists. It's sort of become Seed Space, or?
It's pretty much merged into the same thing. We haven't legally gotten rid of one name, so that's kind of the next big thing that we'll, you know, look at as a board.
But someone was running it beforehand, and
yeah. So the Nashville Cultural Arts Project was founded in 1999, and they got a huge grant, and for 3 years they did a lecture series with, you know, superstars of the art world like Vito Acconci and Shirin Nishat, and it was amazing. And then they just stopped doing things. I mean, they didn't do anything. So I knew that there was a sort of a defunct nonprofit through another project that I was working on, and I found out because the person I was doing that other project with said, hey, there's this thing, and I know these guys, I bet they'd be our fiscal agent. And I was like, I don't even know what that is. Great. Steer me through that. And then from there, once I realized, you know, write a grant and get some money, I just started doing that. And Seed Space now is it's the only nonprofit venue solely dedicated to contemporary art in the area.
Wow.
Cool.
Well, as soon as I'm getting new knees in a couple of weeks. So once I'm done, if you do actually, you know, need to, I don't know, any help pushing Take Care again, I'd love to be back in touch. So.
Oh, cool. Okay, awesome. You know, and this is the other thing everybody know. Once you offer to help, I'm going to be calling you. So.
Please put me back on the list. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Monica. Keith, you had a comment or a question. Go ahead, Keith.
Yes, one of each, a comment followed by a question. I'm so glad that we're looking at a socially engaged artist. And Adrienne, thank you for existing and for setting an example for us. I really like the kind of stuff that I see on the different websites that I've consulted to get to know your work a little bit. But I want to ask a question about how far can and should a socially engaged artist go. As I look at your work, it seems to me that you are very balanced, you insist on collaboration, you try and be non-confrontational, it looks to me. And what you do is you try and unsettle people. and facilitate thinking. You try and facilitate expression of others. And it's clear that through your work, you allude to, you suggest some of your concerns. But don't you find that some social problems are so big and some injustices are so intolerable that as an artist, you ought to just scream, you ought to denounce, you ought to confront, rather than allude to and facilitate? And do you think that that is an incorrect approach, a counterproductive approach, or is it just not your style?
Thank you, Keith.
That's a great question. I'm trying to think about how to answer it succinctly. So a lot of socially engaged artists are very in your face. And a lot of them are well, and then some of them are more subtle. And I think there are some topics that are so hard or so big, you know, you have to sort of pick and choose your topic. I think if I'm understanding your question right. I think what I try to do with art is make work where, what is that saying? Don't kill the messenger before they deliver the message. I'm delivering that phrase wrong, but I'm insistent upon anything in my studio and any project that I do that we don't approach the world with art snottiness. And I insist that people recognize that everyone brings their own strengths to the table. So, for instance, if I have a large group of interns and they ask, you know, what could be construed as an idiotic question of, I don't want to even suggest one, but I believe in not making fun of them or rolling my eyes at them. I just say, this is the answer to that, and I don't allow anyone else to do the eye rolling. I think in part the reason I do that is, so I graduated from, again, the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where it was, you know, it was very theory-driven and very, very arty. And once I started, and I graduated in '93, you know, soon after the NEA stopped giving funding to individual artists, and so we were all kind of left figuring out how could we, you know, make our stamp on the world, and how could we, or at least I wanted to know, how could we re-educate people with the goal of getting them to appreciate and fund art. So I'm trying to do it very gently, and really all I want to do is make people think. I could care less what they think about, but I want them to think about how they can be the best individual that they can be for them, and how they can do that without hurting the community in which they live. I have been accused in some of my work, and this is a real touchy situation, that I'm too didactic, which just makes me crazy, particularly when I'm working with the public. And then I've been most recently accused of being too moralistic. And, you know, it's a really high-profile curator. She's like, you know, you're so moralistic. Like, I don't know how well you're gonna pull this off. And, you know, I've been thinking about that a lot and looking at other artists who make work on these social subjects. And, you know, I don't know. I do what I do. But in terms of really pushing, I think a lot of socially engaged artists who are much more on the fringe of what the theorists acknowledge are acting more like social workers, and so they will go into a community. Say, for example, they'll work with an immigrant community to teach them all to read. He seems to have left the building. Anyway, So those are the types of other artists.
I think this is fascinating. So, since you are so communally involved, I don't know. I mean, this is something we really haven't talked about, is how much do you listen to criticism and how do you process it?
I really, I listen to it a lot, and I tell everybody that ideally wait until I ask you for your thoughts so that I can be mentally prepared for it and accept that criticism. And I also want to hear your hardcore criticism, and I say to people, you know, don't worry about saying something that's going to upset me. You know, I hope you say it in a civil way, but I'm taking everything that you say with a grain of salt. And sometimes people, you know, when they say I'm too didactic or I'm too moralistic, and I think about that and think about that, and then I'm like, you know what, if that's what I am, fine. That's just going to be the way I am. And if they don't appreciate that or they think it's wrong, that's just the way I am. And then other times, you know, they may say, oh, you're commenting upon this particular subject. What if you presented it this way? Or it makes me think about this. And that can very often lead me into, you know, other realms that I hadn't really considered. But I invite a wide range of people into my studio, and I try not to talk about the work beforehand. I try to just say, just tell me what this work makes you think about. That's all I care about. And I mostly invite non-artists in to give that kind of feedback. I don't really care what background you come from. I just want to know if what's on the wall, you know, once you're looking at it in a you know, a serious sort of committed way, because I'm standing right there with you, that what I'm trying to communicate is allowing you to have those thoughts in your head.
Perfect. Let's wrap this up. I really appreciate what you're up to, and I've learned a lot. And it's a big task, and you're up for it. And you know, let me know what I can do to help facilitate, augment what you do. You know, I think.
Out offering.
Yeah. Well, you know, use me. I know you're remarkable. I mean, I think all artists want to make a difference, and you are. And you know, that's something to be really, really proud of. And if I go on more than a minute longer, I will cry. You know, this is a wonderful thing you're doing, and you know, let me unmute everybody and, you know, say thank you for being you and what you're doing. And this task that you've taken on, you know, that is endless. You know, this needs to be done forever. And well, I'm glad you're doing it.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
I really appreciate y'all listening to me for so long. That was very sweet of everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Adrienne.
Thank you.
I got another question I'll ask you offline. Thanks, everybody. I will see you next week. Adrienne, thanks a ton. Good night, all.
Thanks.